The first thing Elena Vance noticed in the VIP parking garage wasn't the unsettling silence, but the sudden, deliberate absence of light. Her two highly trained security escorts crumpled quietly to the concrete floor, neutralized before their radios could even emit a single crackle. She stood completely alone beside her sleek black sedan. The undisputed chief executive of Vance Global was now completely swallowed by the surrounding shadows. A heavy, unmarked white transit van slid silently out from behind a concrete pillar, seamlessly blocking the only exit ramp to the surface. A figure stepped out from the darkness. His posture was not erratic or hostile, but chillingly professional, moving with calculated precision. He did not address her as Madam CEO or Miss Vance. He simply looked at her and whispered softly, "Good evening, Mrs. Hayes." That specific name struck her with more force than a physical impact. Only a handful of people on Earth knew she carried that surname. Pure instinct took over as Elena's hand closed tightly around a delicate silver chain hidden discreetly beneath the collar of her silk blouse. Attached to that chain was her wedding band, the undeniable proof of a secret marriage to a man her wealthy board members deemed entirely invisible. "Do not resist the procedure," the operative advised with a flat tone, firmly guiding her toward the open doors of the van for an involuntary transit. The heavy sliding door of the transit van slammed shut with a definitive, metallic thud, sealing the interior in absolute darkness. Acceleration screeched through the concrete cavern as the vehicle tore away, leaving behind twin black streaks of rubber on the polished floor. Far above the garage, on the quiet 41st floor, Julian Hayes was pushing a heavy maintenance cart past empty executive conference rooms. He stopped instantly when the overhead lights gave a brief, subtle blink, a microscopic power fluctuation invisible to anyone else. His rugged, handsome Caucasian features hardened into an intense expression of deep concentration as his tactical instinct suddenly flared. Dropping his cleaning equipment without a sound, Julian moved toward the service elevator with an explosive, fluid speed. He bypassed the locked electronic security gates using a specialized maintenance bypass key he always carried hidden in his uniform pocket. When Julian burst into the underground VIP garage, the acrid scent of burnt rubber and the dim red emergency lights greeted him. He knelt beside the two neutralized security guards, checking their pulses with 2 fingers while his eyes swept the empty concrete bay. On the cold floor, glinting under the emergency bulb, lay Elena's torn silver chain. The ring was gone, carried away into the night. Exactly 18 months earlier, the towering glass facade of Vance Global had been hammered by a relentless, freezing autumn downpour. Elena Vance, newly appointed and vulnerable to hostile board members, stepped out of her town car without her usual security detail. From the blind spot of the pouring rain, a frantic figure rushed toward her, bypassing the front desk cameras entirely. Julian Hayes, soaking wet in his dark maintenance uniform, was repairing a faulty street-level drainage grate mere feet away. There was no theatrical warning. Julian simply inserted himself between the aggressive figure and the frozen CEO with astonishing speed. He did not strike the man. Instead, he utilized a fluid, structural lock, bringing the aggressor to the wet pavement silently. The movement was too precise, too practiced for a simple maintenance worker. It was the physical vocabulary of a former operative. Elena stood paralyzed, the heavy rain ruining her expensive tailored coat, watching this handsome stranger subdue the threat effortlessly. When the authorities arrived, Julian released the restrained man, picked up his tools, and turned to walk away without asking for a reward. "Keep your head down in the rain, miss," was the only thing the rugged Caucasian man said before vanishing into the storm. 3 days later, Elena Vance stepped out of her comfort zone and into a working-class suburban neighborhood to find the man who had intervened. She stood in the doorway of a modest, warm apartment, a stark, beating contrast to her cold, sprawling penthouse of glass and steel. Inside, Julian was casually patching up a scraped knee on a bright-eyed, blonde 7-year-old girl named Lily. Lily looked up at the stunning CEO in her immaculate designer suit and innocently asked if rich people ate regular peanut butter. For the first time in years, a genuine, unguarded laugh escaped Elena's lips, surprising even herself. Julian looked up, his sharp hazel eyes softening as he witnessed the formidable businesswoman reveal a rare glimpse of joy. Over the following weeks, their unlikely connection deepened through quiet evenings filled with Lily's clumsy piano playing. Elena learned the outlines of his classified past, a former extraction specialist who traded a life of shadows for his daughter's peace. They married quietly in a modest courthouse, with Lily holding a small bouquet of grocery store flowers. But Elena's uncle, Arthur, sternly warned her that the board would weaponize her marriage to a blue-collar worker against her position as CEO. Julian understood the corporate battlefield better than Elena expected. A known identity was a target, secrecy provided tactical room to breathe. To maintain steady benefits for Lily and keep a quiet watch over his wife, he took a night maintenance position inside Vance Global Tower. Their lives sharply divided into daylight and after hours. By day, Elena commanded the grand marble lobbies, a flawless vision of corporate authority. By night, Julian moved through those exact same corridors in gray coveralls, rendering himself completely invisible to the elite class. She spent her afternoons in glass boardrooms, silencing rooms full of aggressive bankers with nothing but a lowered voice and sharp intellect. He spent his midnights in those same boardrooms, quietly emptying wastebaskets filled with discarded financial projections and half-drunk expensive coffee. The symbol of their union was hidden. Elena wore her wedding band on a delicate silver chain tucked safely beneath her designer blouses. Julian kept his ring threaded on a dark tactical cord beneath his uniform, feeling the cold metal press against his chest as he worked. The arrangement felt practical at first, until the day they accidentally crossed paths near the executive elevators during a shift change. Elena walked past with a group of investors, forcing herself to look straight ahead, while Julian silently stepped back to polish a brass handrail. In the modest suburban kitchen, Julian prepared a simple dinner before his exhausting night shift at the tower. Lily sat nearby at the small table, struggling with her math homework in a pair of carefully patched denim jeans. The quiet evening shifted when Elena arrived hours late, carrying an extravagant, designer educational kit for the young girl. Wealth had unexpectedly become a silent battlefield between the couple. Julian firmly pushed the expensive box back across the counter. He insisted his daughter be raised with grounded realities, not as a sheltered accessory to corporate abundance. Elena defended the purchase using cold corporate terminology, speaking of optimal timing and market sensitivities instead of family warmth. Julian absorbed the corporate excuses without raising his voice. He simply turned away to wash the dinner plates in silence. Standing in the dimly lit hallway, Lily watched the suppressed conflict, possessing an emotional awareness far beyond her years. Later that evening, clutching a worn stuffed animal, the child asked a question that shattered the CEO's formidable armor. When will people stop treating Dad like a shadow? Elena sat frozen on the edge of the bed, entirely devoid of an answer. The emotional weight of Lily's heartbreaking question lingered for days, fundamentally shifting the quiet atmosphere inside the suburban apartment. But internal family distance soon became entirely secondary to physical danger, as Julian's trained instincts began noticing subtle external disturbances. A heavy, unmarked black vehicle appeared twice near Lily's elementary school, lingering carefully just outside the perimeter of the security cameras. Later that week, Julian caught the distinct reflection of the same dark vehicle trailing him during his pre-dawn walk home from the tower. The ultimate, undeniable warning arrived in a blank envelope, delivered directly to their heavily guarded suburban address without a return label. Inside was a single photograph of the courthouse steps on their wedding day. Lily's innocent face was deliberately circled in red ink. Julian immediately incinerated the photograph in the kitchen sink before Elena returned, his jaw clenched in cold, calculated anger. Despite his efforts, a faint crescent of dark ash remained near the drain, catching Elena's sharp eyes the moment she entered. Forced into a corner, Julian revealed just enough to terrify her. Silas, a ruthless adversary from his classified past, was no longer a buried memory. When Elena angrily demanded why he kept this hidden, Julian looked toward Lily's bedroom, confessing he simply wanted one corner of his life completely untouched. Inside Vance Global Tower, the danger was not solely external. Billionaire rival Marcus Thorne sought to exploit any executive vulnerability. Marcus brought in Garrick Sloan, a heavily built security consultant with flat eyes and a highly professional mercenary background. Under the guise of protocol upgrades, Garrick quietly restructured the building's access logs and camera sight lines. Late one evening, Julian was methodically cleaning the exterior glass of the main executive conference room. Inside, Marcus and Garrick were discussing the CEO's undisclosed liabilities, unaware that the target's husband was inches away. Garrick suddenly paused mid-sentence. He observed the maintenance worker through the glass with intense, calculating scrutiny. The consultant recognized Julian's hidden competence, the balanced weight, the disciplined posture, the constant situational awareness. Seeking to assert dominance, Marcus stepped to the doorway and loudly mocked Julian's presence near the leadership suite. Julian offered no reaction. He simply absorbed the public humiliation and continued wiping the glass with methodical precision. Sitting alone in her adjacent private office, Elena heard every cruel word. Once again, she chose the safety of silence, letting the guilt consume her. Julian returned to the quiet suburban apartment at dawn, silently stripping off the gray uniform that had become his daily humiliation. Elena was waiting for him at the kitchen table, unable to sleep, her hands wrapped tightly around a cold cup of coffee. She attempted to justify her silence in the corridor, desperately citing market optics and the upcoming board vote. Julian splashed cold water on his face, staring at his exhausted reflection in the dim bathroom mirror. He didn't yell, he simply told her that understanding the strategic reason for a wound didn't stop it from bleeding. The quiet devastation in his voice made Elena realize she was slowly adopting the exact cruelty of the board members she despised. Across the city, Marcus and Garrick were finalizing the logistics for a catastrophic pressure event at the upcoming annual corporate gala. Garrick methodically marked structural blueprints of the VIP garage, highlighting the exact camera blind spots he had successfully engineered. The day of the highly anticipated gala arrived, accompanied by a freezing wind that snapped the flags outside Vance Global Tower. Julian watched his wife depart in a stunning dark green gown, knowing he would attend the same event strictly as an invisible ghost in coveralls. The Vance Global ballroom glittered with everything Julian distrusted: too much forced laughter, blocked exits, and predators in tailored suits. Elena moved gracefully through the elite crowd in her dark green gown, projecting an impenetrable aura of corporate invulnerability. Near the service doors, Julian methodically replaced trash liners and collected discarded champagne flutes, completely ignored by the wealthy donors. The tension shattered when a prominent business reporter cornered Elena, aggressively asking about rumors of a hidden romantic attachment to a subordinate. The surrounding executives fell silent. Across the room, Julian paused with a folded towel in his hand, waiting for her answer. Fearing the board's judgment and a drop in stock prices, Elena chose cowardice. She publicly and coldly denied any such relationship. Julian lowered his eyes for half a second, swallowing the bitter pill of her public denial, before turning to wipe a nearby table. Seizing the moment, Marcus deliberately knocked a glass of red wine onto the marble floor right in front of Julian. As Julian knelt to blot the stain, Marcus loudly proclaimed that a building belonged to the elite, not the men who swept it. Julian looked up, his expression terrifyingly calm, and replied quietly, "A building belongs to the people who keep it standing." Julian's quiet retort wiped the smugness from Marcus's face, but Elena's uncle stepped in, gripping her elbow to ensure she didn't intervene. Elena stayed frozen in place, bound by corporate rules, knowing deeply that Julian felt her continued failure to defend him. As the gala thinned, Julian observed Garrick whispering into his cuff and admitting two unauthorized men through a restricted staff corridor. Recognizing an imminent extraction, Julian immediately texted his wife a strict warning to avoid the lower VIP garage. Elena saw the message on her glowing screen, but a tangled knot of pride, anger, and exhaustion prevented her from replying. When Garrick approached and falsely claimed the lobby was swarming with reporters, Elena allowed herself to be guided toward the lower basement. Moments later, Julian's phone buzzed with a single, desperate word from Elena before her signal died: rain. It was their private distress signal. Julian dropped his trash bag, tore off his vinyl gloves, and broke into a full sprint. He descended the concrete service stairs 5 flights at a time, completely shedding the janitor disguise for the lethal focus of a soldier. Down in the garage, Garrick stepped aside coldly as the unauthorized men grabbed Elena, though she fought back fiercely against the ambush. Despite the surprise ambush, Elena refused to be a passive victim, driving her heel sharply into one operative's knee and slamming her elbow into another's ribs. She nearly reached the emergency alarm column before a heavy-gloved hand caught her blonde hair, snapping her backward with overwhelming force. The man who had called her Mrs. Hayes finally stepped into the dim light. Silas Varick's silver hair and scarred jaw matched the burned photograph perfectly. Silas watched her struggle with amused patience, whispering that her husband would inevitably trade his own life for hers because of his predictable defect. Julian burst from the concrete stairwell just as the heavy van door slammed shut, missing the extraction vehicle by a canyon of 3 agonizing seconds. A single operative remained behind to cover the escape, raising a kinetic tactical tool toward Julian with chilling, professional calm. Julian closed the distance before the man could finish aiming, moving without rage or panic, utilizing skills stripped down to absolute, violent necessity. He twisted the weapon away, delivered a precise neutralizing strike to the throat, and swept the man's legs, pinning him to the concrete instantly. Evelyn Brooks, the company's general counsel, arrived moments later with building guards, stopping dead at the horrifying and astonishing sight before her. The quiet janitor they had relentlessly mocked now stood over an unconscious mercenary, radiating sheer command, his fist closed tightly around Elena's broken silver chain. Evelyn Brooks stood frozen in the dim garage, struggling to reconcile the quiet maintenance worker she knew with the formidable operative standing before her. Julian wasted no time on explanations, delivering rapid, authoritative instructions to lock down the security footage and isolate Garrick's internal team immediately. Without waiting for a response, Julian vanished into the labyrinth of service corridors, his movements shifting entirely from civilian to tactical. Deep within an abandoned maintenance closet, he unlocked a hidden wall panel, retrieving a dusty metal case containing remnants of his classified past. He bypassed conventional networks, utilizing a secured satellite phone to contact Hunter, a former extraction specialist who understood the imminent threat of Silas. His next call was to his neighbor, instructing her to immediately relocate Lily to the basement of their local church for emergency sanctuary. When Lily's small, frightened voice came through the receiver, Julian made a solemn vow to bring her stepmother home, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, in the brightly lit executive suite, Preston Hale eagerly convened an emergency board meeting, attempting to leverage the crisis into a corporate coup. Evelyn swiftly interrupted the proceedings, projecting the raw garage footage and exposing the unauthorized financial transfers between Preston's accounts and the mercenaries. Watching the footage from his estate, Arthur witnessed the janitor's lethal defense of his niece, finally grasping the true magnitude of the man Elena married. The unmarked vehicle finally arrived at an abandoned industrial smart warehouse near the Cold River, a desolate fortress of rusted steel and shadows. Inside the cavernous space, Elena was secured tightly to a heavy metal chair, completely surrounded by the chilling silence of the operation. Silas Varick sat across from her on a wooden crate, calmly drinking from a thermos as if negotiating a standard corporate acquisition. He explained his vendetta. Julian's past operative unit had not merely disrupted his operations, they had dismantled his myth, reducing him to nothing. Silas leaned forward, his voice dripping with venom, pointing out that Elena had similarly stripped Julian of his dignity to protect her throne. The ruthless accusation pierced Elena deeply. Her cowardly silence in the boardroom had simply been another cage for the man who saved her. Silas placed a damaged smartphone on a crate, calculatingly positioning it to force Elena into baiting her husband toward a fatal enclosure. Instead of breaking down in despair, Elena's corporate mask hardened into sheer defiance. She absolutely refused to be the weakness that destroyed him. While maintaining unyielding eye contact with her captor, her bound hands secretly explored the metallic structure of the chair behind her back. Her fingertips located a jagged, rusted bolt. With agonizing slowness and precision, she began meticulously fraying the thick plastic restraint binding her wrists. Julian Hayes arrived at the perimeter of the abandoned warehouse just as a thin, slanted snowfall began to dissolve into the freezing river. Through a secured earpiece, Hunter's voice provided the tactical layout, warning Julian that corrupted local units were being deliberately redirected away from the site. Embracing the lethal mindset he had buried for years, Julian moved through the shadows with terrifying silence, targeting the perimeter security. He neutralized the first operative near the loading dock instantly, utilizing a structural chokehold that ended the confrontation without a single audible sound. Slipping inside a damp corridor smelling of machine oil, Julian found Garrick Sloan waiting with a drawn kinetic weapon and a confident smirk. The confrontation lasted less than 30 seconds. Julian deflected the weapon, dismantled Garrick's defense, and left the mercenary bound to a heavy industrial pipe. Moments later, the damaged smartphone on the wooden crate illuminated. Julian answered the call, his voice projecting the same calm resonance he used to comfort his daughter. Silas demanded Julian surrender at the front entrance, confidently believing the former operative would blindly sacrifice himself for his hidden love. Refusing to be a victim, Elena leaned toward the phone and loudly declared that she was entirely proud to call the maintenance worker her husband. Standing in the dark catwalk above, Julian closed his eyes for a fraction of a second as her fierce declaration healed an 18-month-old wound. High above the warehouse floor, Julian navigated the rusted metal catwalks with silent precision, locating the facility's main environmental control panel hidden in the shadows. Below, Silas's arrogant composure cracked following Elena's defiant shout. He sharply ordered his remaining operatives to fan out and secure the massive structure. Julian did not engage directly. Instead, he triggered the warehouse's obsolete fire suppression system, weaponizing the environment against the heavily armed mercenaries. A deafening mechanical roar echoed as high-pressure water and freezing steam violently erupted from the ceiling pipes, plunging the cavernous room into absolute visual chaos. Silas's men shouted in confusion, blinded by the sudden deluge. Elena instantly recognized her husband's tactical signature and seized the critical moment. Pushing through the pain, she ground the thick plastic restraint against the jagged bolt with relentless force until it finally snapped, freeing her hands. Julian descended into the thick fog like a phantom, neutralizing a disoriented operative with a swift, silent, and highly efficient structural takedown. Realizing his absolute control was rapidly disintegrating, Silas backed away from the expanding steam cloud, raising his kinetic deterrent with calculating caution. Refusing to remain a stationary target, Elena quickly armed herself with a heavy discarded iron pipe, fully shedding her corporate persona for raw survival. Through the swirling, freezing mist, Julian and Elena briefly locked eyes. The rigid barriers of class and title evaporated, leaving only two formidable equals. The final confrontation moved toward the exposed loading dock, where the freezing river slapped violently against the old wooden pilings. Distant sirens began to wail through the night air, signaling that Evelyn's emergency lockdown protocols were finally bringing the authorities. Desperate, Silas lunged and seized Elena, dragging her backward toward the icy water with a heavy arm secured around her throat. But Elena was no longer a passive captive. She drove the heavy iron pipe backward, striking Silas's knee to break his grip. That singular moment of broken balance provided Julian the opening he needed, closing the distance like a striking predator. Silas drew a serrated tactical blade, the cold metal catching the dim moonlight as the two men clashed violently on the slippery dock. Julian expertly deflected the lethal strike, pinned Silas's wrist, and brought him crashing down onto the wooden boards with breath-stealing force. Half-conscious, Silas laughed bitterly, taunting the former operative to finish the story properly and surrender to his darkest, most violent instincts. Julian knelt over him, fists trembling, but as he looked at Elena holding her broken wedding chain, he chose disciplined mercy instead. When the heavily armed police finally flooded the warehouse, they found the formidable CEO standing proudly beside the maintenance worker, openly declaring him her husband. 2 days later, an emergency board meeting was convened inside the cold, polished glass and steel heights of Vance Global Tower. Elena Vance entered the room, her face bearing the faint, unhidden bruises of the recent ordeal, projecting an entirely new kind of formidable strength. She did not arrive alone. Julian walked steadily beside her, wearing a simple navy suit, his left arm heavily bandaged beneath the fabric. Even young Lily insisted on attending, wearing a neat navy sweater and glaring bravely at the executives who had previously mocked her father. Evelyn Brooks efficiently presented the undeniable digital evidence, fully exposing Preston Hale's financial collusion with the mercenaries. Despite the damning evidence against Preston, a senior director attempted a softer maneuver, questioning Elena's executive judgment in concealing her marriage to a subordinate. Elena stood up immediately, her piercing gaze silencing the massive room before Julian even had a chance to react. She did not apologize. Instead, she boldly stated that she hid her marriage because she feared their elite prejudice would reduce a highly capable man to a mere job title. Julian stared at the mahogany table, inherently uncomfortable with public praise, but Elena reached out and firmly locked her hand with his. From the head of the table, Arthur spoke slowly, finally admitting that his own corporate teachings had valued shallow optics over true character. The subsequent board vote was swift and decisive. Preston Hale was officially terminated for cause and immediately referred to federal investigators. Stripped of his polished arrogance, Preston was escorted from the glass boardroom by corporate security, his ambition ending in utter disgrace. Evelyn Brooks was unanimously appointed to lead an independent ethics review, her uncompromising authority making several remaining directors shift uncomfortably. When the exhausting meeting finally adjourned, Elena stood tall, deliberately keeping her hand locked firmly with Julian's. They walked out through the heavy double doors together, greeted by a profound, stunned silence from the gathered corporate staff. Young Lily bounded forward with a bright smile, slipping her small hand securely into her father's uninjured right hand. For the first time in the history of the Vance Global Tower, the three of them walked down the marble corridor openly as a family. Exactly 1 week later, the grand marble lobby was completely packed with aggressive reporters, flashing cameras, and murmuring analysts. Elena stepped up to a sleek podium beneath the towering chandelier, refusing to let the media dictate the narrative of her life. Julian stood stoically beside her in his simple navy suit, hating the spotlight but unwavering in his public devotion to his wife. Life did not magically become simple, but it finally became transparent. Silas Varick was indicted on multiple federal charges, his terrifying myth permanently broken. Preston Hale, stripped of his elite allies, found no sympathy from juries who despised men who opened doors for monsters. Inside Vance Global, Evelyn Brooks relentlessly rebuilt the corporate culture, completely stripping away the toxic elitism that nearly destroyed them. She instituted a mandatory directive: every senior executive was required to spend 1 full day shadowing frontline maintenance staff in gray uniforms. The most surprising shift, however, came from Arthur. The haughty patriarch arrived at the suburban duplex completely unannounced, holding a simple bakery box. Young Lily answered the door, glaring up at him and bluntly asking if he was there to be scary or normal. Arthur stepped into the small, cluttered kitchen where Julian was calmly brewing coffee, looking entirely out of place in his bespoke suit. He did not offer a theatrical corporate speech. He simply looked at Julian and offered a profound, genuine apology for his previous blindness. Julian, measuring the older man's sincerity, offered a slow nod of acceptance and handed him a warm ceramic mug. As Lily returned to her clumsy piano practice, Arthur realized that true legacy wasn't an empire of glass, but the family playing in that room. Julian sat at the kitchen table, calmly discarding lucrative offers from private security firms and aggressive media outlets. He had no desire to turn his classified past or his defense of his family into a profitable public spectacle. Instead, he accepted a quiet advisory role at Vance Global, focusing entirely on structural readiness and workplace dignity. He kept his old, worn maintenance badge locked in a drawer, preserving it not as a wound, but as a permanent witness to their journey. Elena's corporate armor continued to soften, replaced by a grounded tenderness she had previously viewed as a vulnerability. This transformation was most evident during a prestigious winter recital at Lily's suburban elementary school. Elena sat proudly in the front row, completely ignoring the whispering elite parents who recognized the famous CEO. When a curious parent asked about her connection to the performer, Elena smiled warmly and declared, "She is my daughter." Lily heard the declaration from the stage. She missed a single note, then recovered beautifully, tears of joy shining on her face. After the performance, the young girl rushed off the stage, throwing herself directly into Elena's embracing arms while Julian watched from the aisle. Months passed. The Vance Global Tower, once a symbol of cold isolation and corporate ruthlessness, now operated under a completely transformed ethos. Julian walked the 41st floor during the bright daylight, no longer pushing a maintenance cart, but carrying a leather portfolio. Employees who had once looked right through him now greeted him warmly, acknowledging his quiet authority and steady presence. Inside the glass boardroom, Elena conducted the quarterly meeting. Her demeanor was no longer rigid or defensively armored against her peers. She actively listened to her subordinates, projecting a grounded, empathetic leadership that commanded far more respect than her previous intimidation tactics. During a brief intermission, Julian entered the room openly, bringing her a warm cup of coffee, a simple gesture that once invited scandal. The remaining executives observed this interaction without a single whispered judgment, offering only polite, respectful nods to the couple. Later that evening, Elena and Julian stood together on the high-rise balcony of her private office, looking out over the sprawling city. The physical and emotional distance that used to define their secretive public relationship was completely and permanently erased. Julian wrapped a strong arm around her shoulders, the city lights reflecting in the glass, a quiet, enduring victory over the shadows. As winter transitioned into a crisp spring, Vance Global hosted its annual philanthropic gala, entirely devoid of its former shadowed secrecy. Elena arrived in a breathtaking silver gown, radiating a profound, unshakable confidence that no longer relied on corporate intimidation. Stepping out of the vehicle beside her, Julian wore a masterfully tailored black tuxedo, seamlessly claiming his rightful place in the elite environment. The gathered crowd of wealthy executives naturally parted for them, their whispers now carrying notes of awe rather than mockery. An older, arrogant business partner intercepted them, offering a thinly veiled, condescending remark regarding Julian's remarkably humble origins. Elena did not shrink or deflect, she simply placed a firm, claiming hand on her husband's arm, her posture solidifying into steel. With chilling politeness, she delivered a quiet, devastating reprimand that instantly dismantled the older man's false sense of superiority. Julian remained perfectly still, offering the man a calm, unbothered smile that carried the terrifying weight of a highly trained operative. Humiliated and utterly defeated by their unified front, the business partner retreated quickly back into the safety of the murmuring crowd. Later that evening, the couple shared a slow, intimate dance in the center of the ballroom, entirely indifferent to the watching eyes. The morning after the gala, financial publications universally highlighted the formidable unity of the Vance Global CEO and her highly capable husband. The malicious whispers that once circulated through the elite corporate networks were definitively replaced by a quiet, enduring respect. Julian officially transitioned into his advisory role, redesigning the structural safety protocols from the advanced security hub on the 50th floor. He treated the frontline maintenance staff with profound dignity, ensuring the invisible workforce was finally recognized as the building's essential foundation. Meanwhile, inside her sunlit office, Elena was not reviewing corporate acquisitions, but meticulously finalizing a deeply personal legal document. Her elegant signature formally completed the adoption paperwork, legally cementing her permanent role as Lily's mother. The family returned to the exact same city courthouse where Elena and Julian had married in absolute secrecy 18 months prior. This time, there was no hiding from the rain or the public eye. They ascended the wide stone steps in bright, unapologetic daylight. Inside the classic wooden courtroom, an older judge offered a warm smile as the heavy official seal stamped the final decree. Lily reached up, securely holding the hands of both her father and her new mother, their unbroken family finally standing in the light. On the exact one-year anniversary of the warehouse extraction, Vance Global Tower stood quiet and empty after hours. Snow feathered gently against the towering glass windows, softening the harsh city lights into warm halos. Elena and Julian returned to the 41st floor, walking the polished marble corridor entirely alone. They stopped precisely at the brass handrail where Julian had once spent his midnights wiping away fingerprints. The physical space was exactly the same, but the oppressive atmosphere of hidden shame had entirely evaporated. Elena looked at the reflection of them in the dark glass, no longer separated by corporate titles or custodial uniforms. She acknowledged that she once believed the hallway was a fortress, a place where she had to protect her father's legacy at all costs. Julian brushed his thumb over her silver ring, understanding that the corporate fortress had actually been a prison of loneliness for both of them. They shared a quiet, knowing laugh, the sound moving down the empty corridor like a final act of forgiveness. The shadows that once dictated their every movement were permanently banished, replaced by an unshakable partnership built on mutual dignity. At its heart, this story reminds us that true worth has absolutely nothing to do with executive titles, tailored suits, or the corporate spotlight. It lives in quiet courage, unwavering loyalty, and the fierce willingness to protect and uplift the people we love. Julian, the humble maintenance worker who risked everything, proves that human dignity never waits for public recognition. It shines brightly through steady service, quiet kindness, and the absolute resolve to stand tall when others look down. Elena's difficult choice to stop hiding her marriage challenges every single one of us to reject shallow societal judgments. Their journey proves that transparency, mutual respect, and love are never weaknesses, they are the forces that reshape entire communities. When we look past the uniforms and truly pay attention to character, we unlock the absolute best in one another. Think about the invisible workforce in your own circle, the parent working night shifts, or the colleague fixing problems before anyone notices. If this message moved you, please share a moment when someone's quiet bravery touched your own life in the comments below. Smash that like button for our hidden heroes, and hit subscribe, because ordinary people constantly inspire extraordinary change.